Welcome to the Explainer. All right, let's jump straight into this. I want you to imagine something absolutely wild for a second. Imagine that your literal next-door neighbor is the untamed creator of the universe. And we are not talking about some abstract, distant concept of a deity here. We're talking about a highly concentrated, overwhelming physical presence of absolute perfection. Taking up residence right in the smack-dab center of your neighborhood.
I mean, it's a terrifying, incredibly high-stakes setup, right? Because in this specific scenario, the absolute blinding holiness of God and the deep, deep imperfection of humanity, well, they create a highly volatile reaction when they meet. Literally, one wrong step onto his lawn and you are entirely consumed. So the obvious question is, how do you even survive that reality?
Well, that is the exact reality we're unpacking today, pulling from a really fascinating, detailed expositional study by Wayne Kim. He breaks down the ancient blueprints of the tabernacle found in the book of Exodus, specifically chapters 28 through 30. Now, a lot of people gloss over these sections. They think it's just this incredibly dry inventory of ancient textiles or, archaic slaughter rituals. But what Wayne Kim's study points out is that this text isn't a catalog. It's a literal survival manual. It is an absolute masterclass in how ancient Israel managed the incredibly volatile intersection of divine holiness and human imperfection.
Okay, to really get a feel for that volatility, we have to visualize the physical environment. Picture it. You're in a brutal, scorching desert. Right in the center of the camp is this massive enclosed tent complex. If you were to walk inside, the sensory overload would hit you like a freight train. You've got the heavy, thick scent of burning fat and incense, suffocating heat, and the blinding reflection of solid gold furniture everywhere you look. Wayne Kim points out three main items in here. You have the Ark of the Covenant, which was the literal epicenter of God's localized presence. You have the table of showbread, pointing toward future sustenance, and the golden lampstand, fueled by pure olive oil, just perpetually burning, representing constant divine illumination. This space was quite literally humming with concentrated spiritual power. You definitely do not just wander into a place like that in your dusty sandals to say hello.
So, Section 1, the spiritual hazmat suit, dressing for survival in the holy place.
Listen, if you are the designated high priest, you cannot just stroll into that intense environment wearing a clean shirt. You need what is essentially a cross between a royal uniform and a high-stakes spiritual hazmat suit. The blueprints in Exodus 28 call for clothing made for glory and beauty, crafted by artisans filled with the spirit of wisdom. And the physical weight of this stuff, it must have been staggering. We're talking about solid gold wire, beaten paper thin and woven directly into blue, purple, and scarlet threads. It is a stunning visual representation of the majesty of the God they're about to approach.
What's super fascinating here is the conceptual mapping of the priest's anatomy, because it shows this incredible shift in meaning. The priest wears a heavy, rigid apron called the ephod. Mounted directly on the shoulders are two solid onyx stones, and they're engraved with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, in ancient Near Eastern thought, the shoulder is the seat of brute strength and burden. He is, structurally, physically dragging the entire community with him into the holy place. But right over that ephod is the breastplate of judgment, resting securely on his chest, and it also bears the 12 names. This brilliantly illustrates a shift. The shoulders represent raw strength, right? But the heart represents affection, memory, and advocacy. He isn't just carrying the people out of obligation, he's literally carrying them over his heart and love.
And get this, hidden right inside a fold of that heavy, jeweled breastplate is a pouch containing the Urim and Thummim, translating to lights and perfections. This was an actual binary divine communication device. They would use it to get a direct yes or no answer from God during massive national crises. This totally shifts the garment from being purely symbolic to an intensely practical instrument of statecraft. The priest is walking around wearing the literal mechanism for divine justice right over his heart.
But underneath all that heavy gold and jewelry is a blue robe. And the hem of this blue robe is where the terrifying reality of the danger really crystallizes. Attached to the hem are alternating embroidered pomegranates and physical golden bells. The text explicitly states that the sound of these bells must be heard when he goes into the holy place. Quote, that he may not die. Because entering God's presence with unatoned sin was completely lethal. Those bells, they were an acoustic proof of life. Just think about the psychological terror of that for a second. You are walking past a heavy veil into a room where literally no one else can follow you. The ambient noise of those little bells echoing in the silence is the absolute only thing telling the people outside that you haven't been struck dead. Actually, historical traditions even tell us the anxiety was so high they would sometimes tie a rope to the priest's foot, just in case they needed to drag his body out.
Moving to Section 2, a radical 7-day transformation, retrofitting flawed humans for a flawless environment.
Here's the massive problem, though. Having the right uniform doesn't actually qualify you for the job. You can't just wrap a flawed human being in gold wire and jewels and magically call him holy, right? The clothes don't fix the internal contamination of the man. To survive, they had to rely on a violent, grueling 7-day consecration process. The core mechanism here is called imputation. Before a bull is killed, the priest physically presses his hands down onto the animal's head. By doing this, the priest is fundamentally saying, my sin, my failures, my total contamination are now migrating into this creature. It is dying in my place. It's the ultimate concept of substitution required just to survive this environment.
Then, the ceremony moves to a ram, and it gets incredibly visceral. The priest takes the ram's blood and smears it on his own right ear, his right thumb, and his right big toe. Now, I know this sounds like bizarre, horror movie imagery to our modern sensibilities, but if you view it through ancient conceptual mapping, it is brilliant. The blood on the ear consecrates his intake. His hearing is now tuned exclusively to God's commands. The thumb consecrates his output. The literal work of his hands belongs solely to the divine. And the big toe consecrates his trajectory. Every single path he walks is now dictated by God. It is a stunning declaration of a total hostile takeover of the human will.
There is absolutely no fraction of its life left for his own personal pursuits anymore. It is a total monopoly. Just as the first ram of the offering turns completely to smoke, meaning total consumption, this process demands complete surrender. Wayne Kim's study connects this ancient mechanism directly to New Testament philosophy, essentially foreshadowing the call for believers to be living sacrifices. You can't just clock in and clock out of this kind of calling.
Which brings us to Section 3, the daily cost of proximity, surviving a normal Tuesday in the tabernacle.
Okay, so the priest survives the intense 7-day consecration. He's installed. Great, but what happens on a normal Tuesday? The psychological weight of this must have been completely exhausting, because the contamination of living in a fallen world doesn't just stop. Maintaining a relationship with absolute purity requires relentless, unbroken upkeep. As we see in Exodus 30, the primary tool for this daily upkeep is the brazen laver, which is this massive bronze basin. Priests had to wash their hands and feet every single time they approached the altar, again, lest they die. You are never fully clean in a permanent earthly sense. Every interaction requires a fresh cleansing. Wayne Kim contrasts this with how we often treat spirituality today. This ancient practice destroys the idea that you can just rely on a one-time spiritual event from 10 years ago. It demands a biological necessity of a daily, present-tense relationship with the divine. It was a structural, perpetual rhythm, paired with the daily burning of incense to maintain this ongoing, continuous dialogue with God. Now, right in the middle of all these intense, sensory instructions, the text introduces something that feels kind of disjointed. It's a census tax. Every man 20 years and older has to pay a half-shekel ransom money to the sanctuary. But the rule here is incredibly rigid. The rich cannot give more, and the poor cannot give less. It is a completely flat fee. In ancient times, the wealthy usually bought premium spiritual access. So why a flat fee here?
Wayne Kim highlights that this text is operating on the level of ontological value. It's an atonement price for the soul. By demanding the exact same silver coin from the king and the beggar, God is fundamentally stating that your soul has the exact same infinite value, whether you are royalty or completely impoverished. The king's wealth literally cannot buy him premium access, and the beggar's poverty does not diminish his worth one bit. This radically subverted ancient cultural hierarchies where the rich just bought the naming rights to the temples. Here, human ego and social strata are completely neutralized right at the front door.
Section 4. Non-customizable reverence. The extreme compartmentalization of the sacred. As we move into the final sections of Wayne Kim's study, we hit a very strict boundary line. It's not just about doing the rituals, it's about the highly restricted botanical recipes for the holy anointing oil and the sacred incense. These instructions gave a very specific recipe of rare spices, like liquid myrrh, cinnamon, and frankincense, and the extreme warning attached to it is mind-blowing. Whoever duplicates these recipes for personal use, let's say even just to perfume their own home for a dinner party, will be, quote, cut off from his people. To be cut off meant literal exile, which was essentially a death sentence in the ancient wilderness. Why so harsh? Because of the extreme compartmentalization of the sacred. The moment an Israelite smelled that specific combination, their brain immediately registered, I am in the presence of the divine. If you allow people to use that scent for a dinner party, you degrade the psychological trigger, you make the sacred common. True worship belongs exclusively to God, no exceptions.
Ultimately, the entire apparatus of the tabernacle was designed to solve the problem of proximity. It created a highly regulated safe zone where a holy God could actually reside in the midst of a contaminated people without completely destroying them. Wayne Kim beautifully connects this to the modern era, noting that we don't have a physical tabernacle today because the dynamic shifted entirely with Jesus Christ. He is called Emmanuel, which translates to God with us. Jesus acted as the ultimate substitute we talked about earlier, taking the fatal blow and tearing the veil. Because of this, listeners today are invited to become a royal priesthood, approaching the Creator directly.
Plunging into the absolute minutiae of Exodus reveals this breathtaking story of human survival and divine pursuit. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We just discussed how God's incense could never be duplicated. It was a strictly non-customizable formula for reverence. But in our modern era, we are absolutely obsessed with customizing our lives. We hack our diets, we hack our schedules, we tune our algorithms to serve our own personal preferences perfectly. So what happens when you realize you don't set the rules? What does it actually mean to adjust our lives to the divine, rather than demanding the divine adjust to us? Keep turning that over in your mind. I really hope this explainer has completely shifted how you view this ancient survival manual. Thanks for hanging out with us today.